Hello everybody and welcome to another Heroes of the Shire deep dive. And in today's deep dive we're going to be looking at one of my favourite heroes, the Warlock. So we have a quick look at the Warlock stats here. Obviously on the back of the boards we've got a little bit of bio, a little bit of blurb, and there's a couple of things that stand out on the stat line. We've got quite high intellect. We've got a very medium agility, and we have quite a low defense. And this will be important to our playstyle because low defense means we need to survive. Across a scenario, you get hit 7 or 8 times, and your ally's got 6 defense, then you're getting hit for 2 damage each time. Even if you get hit, 7 or 8 times that by 2, you're going to be taking another sort of 16 damage over the course of a battle, which is quite significant considering your HP stat is only at 45. That means you're going to be taking about a third. The difference between 6 defense and 4 defense is 33%, so that's how much damage you're going to be taking extra. And in arena mode, players tend to nuke down the hero with the lowest defense because they tend to die faster. So you're going to become a bit of a target in the arena. So that's the Warlock's stat line. Next thing to consider then is the hero ability, because this really will function how we play the hero board. And this states up here, it's called funnel conditions. You can remove any number of negative conditions. Note that it does not say buffs, so it is only for conditions. So we can remove as many negative conditions from as many enemies as we like, and we gain 1 HP for each condition removed this way. So now before we look at the hero board then and the spells, what we would expect to see is that the Warlock is able to place some negative conditions on our opponents. And then without further ado, that would make a little bit more sense now because we can see some of these status effects. Let's just look at these spells one at a time then. So we'll start with a support row. So we've got these 5 support spells across the top here. And then for those of you new to the game, we do have 5 attack spells across the bottom here. And we define attack and support spells with the ranged or the melee icon as well. So again, we can see that these are all attacks and these are all support spells. But looking at Gloom, Gloom's going to target up to 1 enemy, and it's going to give them -2 defense, -2 strength, -2 intellect, and all of those are for 3 turns. This is one of those spells that's overlooked because it's on the left-hand side, and the spells, a general rule of thumb is they tend to get stronger as they go across, and you typically have to wait a little bit longer for some of these other spells. It's not always the case. But I find from playing lots of arena, obviously I played more scenario mode, but it's easier to describe in arena because in arena every play is all about generating more tempo than what your opponent's doing, sort of trading value for their value. And of course over the series of a few turns, if you can get slightly more value than your opponent, that tends to mean that you've got a better chance of winning. So looking into Gloom, the -2 in 3 really important stats. We've got strength and intellect, which are typically most characters' attack modifiers. So we're going to be reducing the damage that they deal and increasing the damage they receive by -2. Now again, if you're in scenario mode and there's multiple allies, let's say we're playing the game's sort of standard normal mode, which is for 3 heroes, or even if you're playing solo and you've got a couple of ally cards, that -2 defense, if there's 3 of you and you all attack each turn, that's an extra 2 damage per attack. And of course you wouldn't get an attack in straight away, but if your allies did, that would be an extra 4 damage the boss or the opponents would receive. And then the following round, if you follow that up again with another attack spell, all 3 of you, that's another 6 damage. So just in the course of 5 attacks, that's an additional 10 damage that you've got through. So while on the surface it's not an attack, it doesn't seem like it's dealing much damage. The more allies you're playing with and the more attack spells that are going to be happening on each round, reducing defense becomes more important. Okay. Then moving on to Heart of Darkness. Split spells. In Heroes of the Shire, we do get both halves of the spell. So we resolve left to right. So the first half of it, we can target up to as many enemies as we like, and they're all going to receive the darkness condition for 3 turns. Then we're also able to grant one ally +2 shadow damage for 3 turns. Typically, we will place the shadow damage on ourselves because Soul Strike is a shadow spell, Shadow Bolt is a shadow spell, Shadow Flame is a shadow spell, and we've got Death Coil, Shadow Storm, and another one down here in the demon form, Shadow Strike. So we can benefit quite a lot from that. However, if you're playing with other allies that do benefit from the shadow damage as well, then of course you've got the option to place it on those as well. And with our Light and Shadow expansion coming out, as you might expect, we do have quite a few heroes that will benefit from that additional shadow damage. Okay, the darkness stays effect then, it would be this stays effect here. It would go on the opponent for 3 turns. And what does it do? So darkness over here, the target suffers 8 damage when an enemy character, pet, gadget, or totem dies. So what this is designed to do, it's designed to allow characters to get damage through by making sacrifices. For example, if the Blood Mage was to sacrifice an ally, whether it be a pet or another hero, and your opponent shrouded in darkness, they would receive 8 undefendable damage. Now, I'll get onto when we want to use this spell in a moment, once I've covered some of the other spells. So moving on, the next spell, we've got Demonic Armor. It's a really strong spell. We've got 2 HP regen over the course of 3 turns, so this is effectively 6 HP, but slow. And then we've got Counter Attack for 3 turns, and Counter Attack allows us to activate our cooldown 0 spell, which is the Corruption over here, for free in response to an enemy's attack towards us. So that means we're able to place Burn, Bleed, and Poison on our enemies when they attack us if we have Counter Attack up, which is fantastic because the Corruption, the Burn, Bleed, and Poison, that will tie into this. Not only will our opponents be taking undefendable damage, when these status effects are going to expire on our enemies, we'll just strip them away with funnel conditions to keep topping up our HP. Okay. And what you've got with Demonic Armor is only on a cooldown 4, so that means there's a good chance that you could have Counter Attack up on the Warlock at pretty much all times, unless of course your opponent can cleanse that off you or strip that away. Now we've got Demonic Form, so you'll notice there's a little white bar here and a little bit yellow text above the spell. This is a casting restriction which has to be abided by. So this one's quite obvious, and it says this spell cannot be cast until round 3. So, and that's predominantly for a balanced perspective. Transforming into the demon straight away is very strong because you gain an additional 50% base HP, and if you start at 45 and you do happen to be the fastest character, you'd gain 50% more of your 45, and it's always rounded up in Heroes of the Shire. So we're looking at another 23 HP, taking you up to 68 turn 1, which is quite strong. You do have the option to do that in the spell mastery. We'll talk about that in a moment. But Demonic Form then, so it'll transform you into your demon, where you do gain that extra base HP. And there's a little clause here that you can't transform back. And what that's for really is just reminding you that the Warlock has no way of transforming himself back at all. That other characters do, such as the Runesmith with his Demonic Rune. So what would happen here then, the demon form would just be a little overlay board, and once we transform into a demon, we place it over the top here. And you'll notice that we've now got 6 new spells in the middle: Demonic Offering, Immortality, Demonic Ritual, Demon Claw, Betrayal, and Shadow Knight. We've now also had our funnel conditions replaced by Demon Outburst. So that's one thing to consider when transforming into a demon, is you're now not going to get that passive HP by removing negative conditions from your opponents. So just be wary of that when transforming into your demon. We'll talk more about demon form shortly when we look at the spell mastery, but that's what this spell would do. Then we've got Army of the Dead. It allows us to summon 2 Army of the Dead cards, which are these over here, on a cooldown 4. So what do the Army of the Dead cards do then is there's a spell here called Raise the Dead, and you're always going to want to cast that if it is available. And it says that you can only cast this spell if no Army of the Dead cards have been added to an ability tab this round. So that means the turn they're summoned, they cannot raise the dead, because of course 2 of them have been summoned to an ability tab this round. That's the important word, this round, not this turn. And it allows them to duplicate each turn, basically 1 card at a time. We can see here then that they're quite easy to kill, they're quite squishy, 9 health, 3 defense. An attack of 12 damage or more will kill them in 1 swing. But they have a really strong passive, well, it's not a passive, it is an attack spell, but predominantly they're going to be doing this each turn, Body Snatch. What Body Snatch is going to be doing is 1 undefendable damage plus strength. So you can see the strength is 2, that's 3 damage a turn for each Army of the Dead you have out. And don't forget, casting this spell over here, Army of the Dead, it will summon you 2 of them straight away. So this is really nice against opponents that are fast, because the Warlock at only 5 agility is sort of mid-table. But if you were, playing with or against huntresses, assassins, musketeers, blood mages, illusionists, then these characters will be going before you, so there's a good chance that your Army of the Dead might go straight after the Warlock, which means then your opponents don't get a chance to kill them, and it means you're guaranteed to get the 6 undefendable damage through, 3 on each Army of the Dead. You'll notice here then that the attack modifier we chose to give the Army of the Dead was Strength, because thematically they're physical attackers. They're not going to be using elemental type spells. And the name Body Snatch, it makes sense for it to be a melee attack. But what we're getting at here is it's a strength attack modifier, and you'll notice that the Warlock has no way at all of increasing strength. Now, that was part of our design choice. It was intentional. It's what we kind of call forced synergies, and we put lots of them across the board with all our characters and spell masteries, where you'll read it and then your thoughts spiral out of control, thinking, oh, hang on a moment, the Huntress, if I remember rightly, has a spell called Inner Beast, which grants +3 strength to a target ally for 3 turns. Now, if I put Inner Beast on the Army of the Dead, this guy's going to be hitting for 6 damage a turn, and that's undefendable damage. So that's what I mean by the forced synergies. That, of course, if you're going to be using your Army of the Dead cards quite often, and we'll talk about that again in the Spell Mastery, then you'll probably want to be working with strength attack modifier allies, characters such as the Huntress, such as the Runesmith, such as the Warrior, etc., War Drummer. Okay, so that's the Army of the Dead spell. Now, before we go on to the attack spells, let's now go back to this Darkness status effect that I mentioned earlier. I'd go into after chatting about some of the other spells, and some of the other spells, of course, are Army of the Dead. So what tends to happen if a human is playing a boss, because they will optimize the boss's plays at all times, hopefully. And the same is true in arena mode. If you're playing against other human players, they'll be able to react better than any AI deck we could ever create. You've got a couple of options. Let's say we go Army of the Dead, and we summon these guys, and then we try to place Heart of Darkness on our opponents. There's a whole turn in between there that your opponents have to kill the Army of the Dead. So what Darkness is, there's a little bit of peace of mind and protection that these guys stay around, the Army of the Dead. Because let's say turn 1 we Heart of Darkness, and we place the Darkness status effect on all our enemies for 3 turns. Okay? Reminding you what Darkness says. They suffer 8 undefendable damage when an enemy character, pet, or totem dies. So if you put Darkness on an enemy, okay, then the turn after we do Army of the Dead, and we summon 2 Army of the Dead, yes, they would have had a turn in between. The Darkness will be on 2 turns on their board. That means then they can cast Shadow Flame, but the consequences are quite dire. Because Shadow Flame have hit for 7 and 6, which is 13, and that would kill all the Army of the Deads in one hit, because 9 and 3, they only have to be hit for 12 damage to die. So your opponents then have got a choice. Do they actually want to kill the Army of the Deads? Because if they do, there's at least going to be 2 of them summoned, 2 of them with darkness. That is 8 undefendable damage for each one that dies. So by getting rid of your Army of the Deads, they're taking 16 undefendable damage, which, if we were to work out the 3 damage a turn, I mean, of course, when we've got 2 of them, it's 6 damage a turn. Even after 2 rounds, that's only going to be 12 damage, because the one will duplicate and won't be able to attack. So they're only going to take 12 damage after 2 rounds anyway. Sometimes it's more beneficial for your opponents to actually leave your Army of the Deads and focus on cleansing their darkness status effect, or just focusing down the Warlock anyway. So when I play Warlock, I never summon my Army of the Dead without the darkness status effect being on my opponents first, because it keeps these guys around a lot longer. Okay, then moving on to attack spells. What have we got down here? We've got Corruption. I touched on Corruption earlier when we were talking about counter attack. Corruption is one of those that, yes, it's your cooldown 0 spell, and it's typically your weakest to most characters. But for the Warlock, it's not. I find myself, the playstyle I enjoy is I'm kind of doing Corruption every turn or every other turn, because I want those negative status effects or the conditions on our opponent. So I always have access here to strip all those away and gain the 1 HP. And then if we have a look at placing Burn, Bleed and Poison on our opponents, as soon as you place them, they'll take 3 damage. So the 45 would go into 42. Okay, then it goes to my turn. I lose another 3. I'm already down to 39. That's 6 undefendable damage of a cooldown 0 spell. And then the following turn, I'll take another 3. And then this is where it would now be beneficial. So next turn, we know that these status effects, most of them, these conditions, should I say, are going to be leaving the hero board. Poison's going to be leaving. Burn won't. It will come back for another 3 turns, but Bleed will leave. So this is where the funnel conditions comes in handy when the conditions are near this gold line, okay? Because that's when they're going to fall off the board. That's when you want to strip them away. However, if you're running a Corruption build with your Warlock where you want to be corrupting like every other turn, then don't wait. If you know the turn after you're going to cast Corruption again, when it goes to your opponent's turn, they take another 3, and these are there. When it comes back to your turn, just use this, strip them away, gain 3 HP, cast Corruption again. Because most of these aren't stackable anyway, apart from Bleed. Unless you have other abilities with other heroes, such as Dragon Knight, for example, to make Burn also stackable as well. So there's Corruption for you. We've got the -1 agility as well from the Poison. So again, it's just such a fantastic cooldown 0 spell. One of the best in the game, if not the best, because effectively it's 9 undefendable damage. Well, no, it's not actually. You've got, what is it? 9 plus another 3, so we're talking 12 undefendable damage over the course of 3 to 6 turns. Okay, pop those over there. Next spell we're gonna have, we've got Soul Strike over here. Soul Strike is quite situational, so it deals a reasonable amount of damage. We got 3 plus int, that's going to hit straight off about 10 damage. It's shadow spell, so it could benefit from the Heart of Darkness. So, turn 1, if we went Heart of Darkness, then Army of the Dead, then we'd want to take advantage of this shadow damage. So we'd want to be casting one of these 3 spells here. So Soul Strike is, 10 damage off the bat, and it wounds your opponent for 2 turns. Now, Wounded is a status effect that, we don't have it on the quick reference there. It's up here, but in short, opponents receive 50% less HP whenever they gain HP. We've got it's at the top here. When a target receives HP, it's decreased by 50%. That's how we worded it. Okay. So that's quite situational. You want to time that well when your opponents are going to be wanting to heal the turn after, because it will sort of increase your chances of them not healing until wounded has left them. Because if they were going to heal for 12 and now they're only going to get 6 HP, 6 HP might, going back to what we said earlier about, the stats and everything being sort of a game of tempo. Do I gain more advantage than my enemy by trading these spells one at a time? It'll be much more beneficial for them to wait the turn after, okay, and then gain their HP the following turn when the status effect this is gone. And then we've got the Scourge spell. Scourge spell is really cool because it's an AoE poison, though it can target up to as many target up to as many enemies as you like. So scenario mode's fantastic for all the trash mobs because it can hit, 3, 4, 5 of them at a time. It can hit lots of pets for the bosses. And then you've also got that -1 on the agility, which is nice. So it's the same damage as Soul Strike. The difference is it's a slightly longer cooldown. It's a ranged spell, not melee. That will become more important in our expansion because we'll have attack modifiers on the combat maps for being ranged and being adjacent to enemies. But again, you might want the poison because it reduces their agility, which might shift around the turn order. And the downside is, of course, you don't get the little reduction in healing effect. Shadow Blast, again, it's just 1 damage more than the Scourge, but instead the damage can't be prevented. So you don't get the extra damage. Well, poison is actually, over the course of the battle, more damage. Scourge is more damage than Shadow Blast, but not on the initial hit. Well, actually, yes, it is exactly the same, actually, because on the initial hit, they would receive the poison. So damage-wise, it is pretty much the same. The difference is Scourge is a poison spell, whereas Shadow Blast is shadow, and we can benefit more from Shadow spells being increased throughout the course of the battle, and other allies can increase shadow damage, but we don't have anything in the game at the moment that can increase poison damage. But what's important on the Shadow Blast is the spell, the damage can't be prevented. Now that is really important. Quite a few bosses place the status effect protection or damage immunity. When you play arena mode, this happens all the time. The Druid's Bark Skin, the Paladin's Light Screen, I think it's Ancient Medicine for the Alchemist. The protection condition is really frustrating because opponents receive 50% less damage, and of course damage immunity is kind of it does exactly what it says on the tin. They can't receive any damage, so Shadow Blast can get around those conditions. Again, a little bit like Soul Strike, I like to leave it open because it's situational, especially if you can see that your opponents do have access to ways of preventing damage. You don't want the spell on cooldown then. And then we've got our big bad boy, our cooldown 6 spell, our Shadow Flame, which is the biggest damage that we can deal. Not only is it, the biggest damage, it's 6 over these 2, which is 4. We do have 2 elemental types, so we've got fire and we've got shadow, which become more important because it's like having 2 attack modifiers, because we can manipulate the damage through increasing fire damage or shadow damage. And again, if we were playing with other characters, maybe the Scholar from memory, maybe the Dragon Knight, that could increase our fire damage. Or we can do it ourselves, but we'll get onto the spell mastery shortly. Again, we've got other ways of increasing this damage. But what this spell does then is it deals 50% more damage if our enemy, or should I say target, opponent, has burn condition. Now, if you remember rightly, we can apply burn with the corruption. So if we went turn 1 corruption, turn 2 Shadow Flame, it would deal 6 plus intellect, which is 13 damage. Let's say our opponent's got 4 defense, 13 from 4 would be 9 damage, and then they take 50% of 9, which is 4.5, we always round up. So 4.5 plus the 5, 9 plus the 4.5 rounded up is 5, 9 plus 5 is 14. So this is a nice big hit for 14 damage to the one enemy that has the burn. But again, if we play with other characters, maybe the Shaman, maybe the Alchemist, the Dragon Knight that will be burning our opponents, It means we don't have to set up with the corruption the turn before. We can just open up with Shadow Flame and hit for some big damage. Okay, so that's predominantly, you know, these 10 spells here in a nutshell. Just the one other thing to consider is how important this is, the funnel conditions. The Warlock is squishy. I've played him numerous times and he's very squishy and he can die fast. And there's so many times where I thought to myself, oh, if I was only 4 or 5 HP higher, then I would have survived another round and then I would have been able to do X, Y, and Z and then I would have been fine. And it's because what I'd been doing is just waiting for my opponent's conditions to sort of deal more damage before I started stripping them away. So, you know, we've also got the darkness, so even if you are not going to be summoning the Army of the Dead and using the darkness as protection, what we've got here is you could immediately just open up with Heart of Darkness just to grant yourself the shadow damage, and then darkness is a negative condition, so once darkness, you know, at any point you can just pull darkness off and gain the 1 HP if you don't have any intention of summoning the pets. So, you know, this is quite nice, but don't forget you can place it on all your enemies. So if we're talking, you know, scenario mode and there's 4 trash mobs, we place darkness on all 4 of them, and then the following turn we can just remove the darkness and gain, you know, 4 HP. So yeah, just a reminder how important the funnel conditions are, and from my last experience of playing the Warlock, you want to be using this more than you think, because he doesn't have, you know, if we look at this base kit compared to when we did our deep dive on the Paladin or the Warrior, there's very limited protection there. Summoning pets, getting counter attack, some conditions there, some enemy reductions there, and turning into a demon. Where's the protection? Where's the healing? So it wants to be coming from this ability. Okay. So moving on to our spell mastery then with the Warlock. As mentioned in previous deep dives, the spell mastery paths will really dictate how we play this hero board. So earlier when we mentioned about, you know, placing darkness and summoning the Army of the Dead, if we go down like the decimation path, we might not be inclined to do that, because you're losing a lot of tempo. When we look into this path in a moment, it wants you hitting hard all the time. Okay, whereas the pets might be more important in these other paths here. So let's have a quick look at decimation then. In short, just to summarize, decimation is direct damage. Demon form is benefiting from our demonic transformation. We'll look at that as well in a moment. And we've got soul harvesting, which is always my favorite way to play the Warlock, which is, you know, corruption, damage over time, and replenishing our HP quite a lot. So decimation then. You and your allies receive semi-permanent +1 fire damage until you are defeated. So +1 fire damage is going to make our Incinerate and our Shadow Flame 1 extra damage, which straight away is really nice. Sorry for jumping around all over the place. I could do this for you, I suppose. It's my mouse, anytime I click the middle button, it just sort of like snaps the tabletop simulator mod a bit higher. Okay, so we got excessive fire then. Again, going back to the strength attack modifier on the Army of the Dead cards. This is like what we said earlier about forced synergies. So you can see here that we're only going to benefit 2 of our spells with excessive fire, Incinerate and Shadow Flame down here. So to really maximize on this excessive fire, we want the Warlock playing with characters like the Scholar, the Dragon Knight, maybe the Musketeer, other characters that can benefit from that increased fire damage. Now, as a level 1 unlock in scenario mode, that's fantastic, because your allies gain the extra damage immediately because characters start at level 1. In arena mode, of course, we would get 5 power cubes, so you would start with it if you unlocked it anyway. And there's not much else to say on excessive fire, so let's move on to Death Coil. Death Coil, we can see, is a shadow elemental type spell. And we'll be able to... Oh, we pressed the wrong button now. So we'll be able to benefit from the Heart of Darkness here, because we can increase shadow damage. then we've got the Death Coil, which might become more important when we read what Death Coil does. It's 0 undefendable damage, but it also adds an intellect attack modifier. So our base stat is 7, so it's going to be 7 undefendable damage. If we had Heart of Darkness, it would be an extra 2, so that would be 9 undefendable, but we gain HP equal to the damage dealt. Not 50% of the damage dealt, all of the damage dealt. Now, because it's undefendable damage, this is really nice. If we can somehow increase our intellect, which we might be able to do in a moment, and we've got the shadow damage, if we can hit for 12, 13 undefendable damage, we net all that HP, and our opponent takes a significant amount of damage. So Death Coil, really strong spell, hence the cooldown 5. You don't want to be using it all the time because it's too strong, so it's a bit of a balancing act for us when it comes to the design aspect. Incinerate, now this is on cooldown 4, not a cooldown 5, so you can use it more often than Death Coil. It is an area of effect attack, so it's going to deal 4 damage, and it looks very reminiscent of Shadow Blast. It is pretty much a direct copy of Shadow Blast, 1 for 1, but it's fire damage instead of shadow, which you gain the extra 1 fire up here. So to have Incinerate, of course, we have to have Death Coil and excessive fire above it, because Heroes of the Shire spell mastery is all progressive, meaning we can't take these down here without having the ones above it. So Incinerate actually is 1 damage better than Shadow Blast, but again, the damage can't be prevented. Now, in arena mode, this is really important, because in a competitive environment where we're going to be selecting our spell mastery spells and abilities one at a time, a little bit like in Catan, where you place your what do we call them, the road and your first little village, is it? I think it's a village that's in the city. Place your village, and then it goes A, B, B, A. So that's how we're going to be looking at running our competitions, where I'll pick 1 spell mastery point, my opponent picks 1, then my opponent picks the second one, and it comes back to me, I pick my second, and then that's the A, B, B, A, and then I start again. I'll go A, they'll go B, B, I'll go A. So if you know you're playing against a Paladin, the Paladin has a really strong spell called Light Shield. My apologies, called Light Screen. Light Screen is an AoE, which means it will target all allies, and it gives them protection for 3 turns, where if you have Incinerator and you have Shadow Blast, the protection is kind of pointless for the Paladin, because you just negate it, and you can do it 2 turns in a row, and then the following turn his protection falls off anyway. So it's a really nice spell, again, situational, in the right matchup. If you're against opponents that don't have ways of putting damage immunity and protection on them and preventing damage, then I guess it's just enough access to another big AoE damaging spell. Okay. Then moving down onto our next spell, we've got Shadow Storm. Shadow Storm, again, is a shadow spell. We can benefit from this increased shadow damage on Heart of Darkness. It's an AoE attack. We're going to attack as many enemies as we can for 2 damage plus our intellect stat. So off the bat, it's 7 and 2. It's going to hit for 9 damage. And the second half of the spell is going to give 1 ally plus 2 intellect for 2 turns, which you typically can give this to yourself, because all of your spells are intellect attack modifiers. So you can always benefit from this. Maybe your other option in scenario mode is to give it to a healer, because if they're going to do an AoE heal, that AoE heal will benefit everybody. But giving it to yourself is quite nice, because you do have access to quite a few multiple target spells, well, especially attack spells anyway. And then last but not least, we've got Shadow Strategy. So we can see down here that this will now increase all our Shadow Elemental type spells by an additional 1 damage. So going back to Shadow Flame, because it's got fire and shadow, now it's going to be increased by an additional 2 damage, because we've got +1 fire damage here and we've got 1 shadow damage here, so it's an extra 2. So this is going to be hitting for 8 and 7. We're now going to be hitting for 15 damage with 50% more of their burning. If they've only got 4 defense, 15 from 4 is going to be 11, and then we're going to be hitting for 50% more of 11, which is 5.5 rounds up to 6. 11 and 6 is 17 damage on a Shadow Flame, which is really nice. Okay, so this is our direct damage path with a fantastic death coil to help increase your HP, because this path doesn't really incentivize you using corruption all that much. You've still got access to it, you've still got options, but there's not any direct benefit here of using corruption. So it means that you might not be placing negative conditions on your opponents very much. You can see a Shadow Storm doesn't apply any, Incinerate doesn't apply any, Death Coil doesn't apply any. So you're not going to be using funnel conditions quite as much as you would in other Warlock builds. So that's where the Death Coil comes in nice. Okay, let's talk about Demon Form last actually. We'll look at the Soul Harvesting path now. The one that I mentioned is my favourite. First off, we've got Fade Away. So this will just increase the efficiency of our Gloom spell. It's also going to give it a -2 base HP. Okay, so Gloom was this spell over here. Now it's going to give -2 defense, -2 strength, -2 intellect, and -2 base HP. If you're not familiar with base HP, how that works is, where's my -2? -2. I missed that bit. It's semi-permanent, the base HP. So it's going to grant -2 strength, intellect, and defense for 3 turns, plus a semi-permanent -2 base HP. So if an opposing Warlock casts Gloom on us right now, we would get, this is how it would look. We'd get -2 strength and intellect for 3 turns, and we get -2 base HP immediately. So if we were at maximum health, our 45 would immediately go to 43. And that means that when I then get healed later on in the game and my HP drops lower, the maximum HP I can go up to is 43. And remember, Gloom's on a cooldown of 3. So if you can, against a boss, bosses sometimes have immunities to some status effects. So where Gloom comes in handy is if you can get like 3 of these off over the course of a battle, your opponents, will basically be at 39 base HP instead of 45, and it means that they can't heal back up to that amount. So it's really nice and it's really strong, and opponents do lose the HP immediately as the condition is applied. And my apologies, this is a buff in this instance. Okay, so that is the increased Gloom that we've got there, an ability called Fade Away. We've got Restore the Dead. Again, because it's got this white dotted line and it's got some yellow text above it, same as our demonic form, that is what we call a casting restriction. So this casting restriction states that you can only cast this spell if 2 Army of the Dead cards have been defeated in battle. So this is basically incentivizing us to get these Army of the Dead out quickly. This time round, we don't need to worry about putting the darkness on them because we kind of want them to die anyway. So if we summon the Army of the Dead, they put out a little bit of damage, our opponents kill them, then the following turn, we can restore the dead, which now allows us to add 3 of them to our ability tab over the 4. Okay, so this is really nice, but situational. We need the pets to die. Again, another option would be playing, in teams where one of our allies can place Taunt on maybe 1 or 2 of the Army of the Deads, just to help them get killed. Another thing to notice here then is we've got a nice little bit of artwork, Army of the Deads. Now, just between you and me, we tested this on all of the spells, put an artwork on them when we originally designed the game. We just found that it was too much because we have a lot of information here. The pretty artwork, because there's not quite enough space in these spell boxes, it just detracted from the information, which is much more important than the aesthetics. So we put it on some of the spells, because it's not too sort of too in your face on this spell here. It looks quite cool. But yeah, just so you guys know in general, because a game that runs similar to ours is Dice Throne, and we know in Dice Throne they have these beautiful artworks across all of the spells, but there isn't very much information on the spells because it's predominantly just if you need a high straight, low straight, etc. It's just done on the dice icons. So we did look at that. We just chose not to do it. And then moving on to Corruption 2.0, which I absolutely love. It says the next time we cast Corruption, don't forget Corruption is our cooldown 0 spell over here that does the burn, bleed and poison. It will now add Lacerate. And then it says you may now cast Corruption. So it allows us to corrupt straight after. So now we're going to apply burn. Sorry, I keep saying burn, bleed, poison. I meant to say bleed, burn, poison. So it will apply 1 damage, 1 damage, 1 damage, and then 2 damage from Lacerate. So that's 5 damage immediately when it's placed on the enemy. Then it goes to their turn, they take a turn, and then they take another 5 damage. So that's 10 undefendable damage effectively by the time your opponent gets their next turn. Not only that, it's now putting more negative conditions on our opponents, which allows us to benefit more from this funnel conditions. And then without further ado, then let's just jump into the next 2, because then we can keep touching back on this funnel conditions over here. So mass rejuvenation, it gives us an extra 1 HP when we get HP for regens. So again, a little bit of forced synergy there. This works nice with a druid. It works nice with a cleric. It works nice with somebody that can... I'm just trying to think from memory. War drummer, other allies that can grant HP regen conditions. So the Warlock can only grant 1 here, demonic armor. So we can still benefit from this if we were, running solo. Our demonic armor would give us an extra 1 HP. So over 3 turns, it kind of is an extra 3 HP should we last. And then this is the important one. The most fun one. It's called Double the Fun. It says that we now gain an additional 1 HP each time effectively we use our funnel conditions ability. Okay, our funnel conditions is here, so we're going to gain 2 HP each condition we remove from our enemy. So going back to this turn 1 play, Corruption 2.0. I go Corruption, I add Lacerate to my Corruption, and then I Corrupt. My opponent takes 5 undefendable, goes to their turn, takes another 5. Then they do a spell, it comes back to me. On my turn then, let's say they attack me, hit me for 10. My defense is 2, I take 8. 40, I've lost 8 health. Then it comes to my turn. I've got the options. Do I wait another turn and do funnel conditions next turn? Or do I just use it now? Let's say I use it now. I'm going to remove burn, bleed, poison, and lacerate. And I'm going to gain 2 HP for each one. I'm going to net 8 HP. In my hypothetical situation, I was just dealt 8 damage. I'll just go back up to full health. Yes, we've lost 5 damage in exchange for 8 HP. But going back to trade-offs, is it worth it? Yeah. You're gaining an extra 3 HP. Again, then you can follow it up the turn after with another corruption anyway. Which would, it keeps the funnel conditions running. And you'll be gaining a lot of HP through removing negative conditions. So when we're going down this build here, we want Corruption 2.0 back as fast as possible because it gives us extra HP. We want Corruption on our opponents all the time, so then we've got the flexibility then to remove these conditions whenever we want. We do want the Heart of Darkness because we want this on our opponents as well. And then don't forget, we also have Wounded as well. So, these 3 here and this here, with the sub-theme of using our pets with the darkness. So this build here, you'll find, turns the Warlock into a semi-tank. But again, it's very situational. If you don't have the time to set up because your opponents are too fast at the block, that can be a weakness for the Warlock. If you're against Huntress Musketeer, you can be down to 20 odd health before you even get a turn, if they play correctly. So, double the fun. This is my favorite way of playing because if I play with like a Blood Mage or if I play with an Alchemist or another hero, I'm trying to think who applies lots of negative conditions. Musketeer, going down the fencing path, will bleed all the time, and Explosive Shot applies burn. So yeah, lots of HP all the time. And you know, you'll slowly deplete your enemies with the corruption, because the damage is all undefendable, don't forget. So you're up against opponents that are really tough, like Warrior, War Drummer, Paladin, Dragon Knight that have got Runesmith that have got high defense stats. Our Kickstarter character, if you have access to the Shield Maiden, high defense again. You don't have to worry about reducing their defense or increasing your intellect. It's all undefendable. So it just gets around the high armor anyway. Okay. And then last but not least, then let's look at the demon form. One thing to notice here, folks, is demon, demon, demon. Okay. So these spells cannot be cast unless you are in your demon form. Okay. Demonic form here turns us into our demon form. So we get this overlay board. Only when we're in demon form can we cast these 3 spells. Okay. Before we look at those spells then, let's just look at the bottom. So if you remember earlier, we have a casting restriction here, round 3. Can't turn into a demon until round 3. We've got a bit of ability here called Turn 1 Demon, and it's exactly what it sounds like, Turn 1 Demon. The demonic form spell now doesn't have the casting restriction until round 3. So you can cast this turn 1. We've also got demonic power down here. After transforming into your demon form, we receive an additional 10 base HP, and we can cast another spell. So that's always the biggest downfall to demon form, demonic form casting that, is when you turn into the demon, that is your 1 spell for turn. So then it goes to your opponent's turn. So you lose a lot of tempo by transforming, but this removes all that tempo because you gain an extra 10 HP and you can cast another spell, which means you can cast one of these or one of these 6 here. Okay, so let's just go into demon form and let's see what demon form does. Demonic form then, or demon form, this hero ability here, this is nice and strong. During our end phase, so you just need to remember it's an end phase trigger because we don't have too many things currently in game with end phase triggers. So end phase is the last phase. So you've got your token upkeep, your dice upkeep, your hero upkeep, you've got your main phase, and then that's concluded with an end phase. So during the end phase, you receive 1 damage. This damage is unpreventable and undefendable, but your opponents receive 2. Okay, so you're getting the tempo in. Your opponents are losing 2 damage and you're gaining the 1. This damage is unpreventable and undefendable, which is fantastic because, again, damage immunity, status effects like or conditions, should I say, such as protection, they do nothing. This damage is getting through no matter what. Okay. So, because our demon's quite different, our demon is not a humanoid character like pretty much our 21 base characters, 20 in the collectors, 10 in the fire, and I use 10 in the earth and the water, and then we did have the 1 Kickstarter character, so we do have a total of 21 at present. And they're all pretty much all humanoids. We've got 1 little dwarf and 1 vampire, but they're predominantly still humanoid. So this guy is different. He's a demon. So we wanted design to do something a little bit different. First off, we made this hero board chaotic. I mean, this looks a bit crazy, the overlay board, and that's because demons, by their nature, are pretty chaotic to represent the chaos. So a couple of things we did different is this here. Let's look at demonic offering first. Each player must vote. They get to vote for each enemy player, should I say. So the benefits of this is the more opponents you have, the much stronger this ability is. If you're only against 1 opponent, it's not so great. You might find something much better to use. But if you've got 3 opponents, this is fantastic. They can vote demon, and if they do, they gain 2 HP. Now you might be thinking, well, why do I want to give my opponents 2 HP? In exchange, you receive 2 strength for 3 turns. Okay, now strength is important for the demon because you'll see his stats up here are slightly different than the warlocks. This guy has more strength than intellect, and this guy does have strength for tap modifiers on these 3 new spells. So gaining 2 strength for 3 turns is quite beneficial. Then if they vote master, they gain strength and intellect for 1 turn. No, my apologies. They gain 1 strength and intellect for 3 turns, which of course is detrimental to you. But in exchange, you gain 3 HP regen. Now imagine we've got 3 enemies and they all vote master because they want the strength and intellect. You'll gain 3 HP regen for each one. So that's 3, 3, and 3. That's 9 HP regen. You gain 9. Your next turn, you gain another 9. The turn after, another 9. Do you think your opponents are going to want to give you 27 HP over 3 turns? Possibly not. So you've got the options. No matter what they pick, you're getting something really good. You're either getting increased strength or you're gaining HP. So it's one to consider. The demonic offering, there's also a whelp offering with a dragon knight. These 2 spells are unique in that out of about 500-600 spells and sort of 200 abilities, there's only 2 of these in the whole game, so they're quite unique to the Warlock. Then the other unique one is the demonic ritual. You receive a buff immediately, and then again during your dice upkeep according to the value of the cooldown dice on this spell. So when we were if we would cast the spell straight away, place a dice on it for 6. Oh. And then it says you receive a buff immediately. Well, that's all I need to know. I receive a buff immediately, and it's based on the value of the cooldown die. So number 6 up here, you receive +3 agility for 2 turns. So I'd get myself +3 agility, +3 agility. How many turns was it? I think it's just 2 turns it was. So that now puts me 4 and 3 is 7. Now 7 is the 2nd fastest agility stat in the game for heroes. So there's a good chance that will put me sort of much higher up in the turn order, meaning I might get my next turn, almost back to back. I do a 1v1 arena against a good chunk of heroes. There's only 2 other heroes that have faster agility. There's a good chance that if you were last, then you'll be going first. You'll get 2 turns back to back. And then funnily enough, in the next turn, this dice 6 would go down to a 5, and then you gain another buff because the dice reads 5 now. You'd gain +3 intellect for 1 turn. So these would obviously all move down. Then you gain your +3 intellect for 1 turn. So this is now going to dictate what we cast. So we might want to cast something like Shadow Flame or Shadow Strike because it's going to add the intellect attack modifier. So you can see here then when this die reads 4, 3, 2, and 1, we gain all these. Number 1 is obviously very nice. You get 6 HP. So we can look at all of these things it grants. It's like casting a spell that says you gain 6 HP, your opponent gets hexed for 2 turns, you gain 3 strength for 1 turn, 3 defense for 1 turn, 3 intellect for 1 turn, and 3 agility for 2 turns. That on its own would be extremely powerful, way too powerful. So how we designed this spell then was we staggered it over the 6 turns. So the pros and cons are you get so much benefit from this, but the downside is in arena mode, games last somewhere between sort of 3 to 8 turns. So if you don't drop this early, you might not benefit from very many of these. You might only get the first 1 or 2. Okay, so you've got to be playing the long haul should you go down this route of using this ability. Okay, then we've got Immortality. What Immortality does is it's like a little one-time get out of jail free card. When we die, we can cast a spell from death, effectively. And if that spell is able to kill an opponent, we would win the battle because we are not defeated until, when is it? We take a bonus turn, during which we cannot be defeated during that bonus turn. So we would be defeated after the bonus turn, which is after the end phase. So during the bonus turn, we can't die no matter what, even if our HP is in the negative. Then we can cast another spell. Let's say we cast Shadow Flame, hit for big damage, and we kill our opponents. Because they're dead, we're technically still alive for Immortality. We win the battle, and that's that. So you always want to have a dice on this when available, because whilst there's a dice on it, you get to basically cast that one spell as you die. And why you want to cast it immediately is because it states here you can cast another spell after it. So it's basically a free spell. As soon as you transform, drop a dice on it, then do something else. Okay. And the next one we've got here, we've got Demon Claw. 3 damage, and it removes a temporary condition. Now, we don't mind about removing temporary conditions anymore because we've lost the funnel conditions hero ability up there. So we're not going to be gaining HP from them anyway. But of course, what you want to be doing really is removing the positive conditions. Things such as protection, damage, immunity, HP regens, increase damage. And it's quite good for damage output. Base is 6 and 3, which is 9 damage on a cooldown 0, and it strips a condition. Quite a solid spell. Betrayal is really nice. Strength again, it's 1 less than Demon Claw, and the reason being is because it applies some quite detrimental negative conditions. Paralyzes our opponents, which means they can't cast any attack spells for 2 turns, and it also means they can't heal for 2 turns. Now, a couple of our community members have asked the question, oh, by 2 turns, don't you mean 1 turn? Because when it gets to their turn, they have a token upkeep and their tokens move down. And that is 100% correct. We don't want to be paralyzing anybody for 3 turns because, on their turn, if they can't do anything for like 2 turns in a row, in real time, that could be 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Not being able to play half the game we found wasn't that fun. So a lot of the detrimental conditions, we intentionally did it like this. So when it goes to their turn, it goes down, and basically this just means paralyzed and can't be healed for 1 turn. It's basically their next turn. There are some certain situations where you can manipulate state specs and increase their duration. You could take it back up. But yeah, so it's going to paralyze them, and it means they can't be healed, which is fantastic, because when they're paralyzed, they can't attack. So that means they're going to be casting a support spell. But we know now that a support spell they're going to cast is not going to be a heal. Moving on to Shadow Strike then. So Shadow Strike is our big spell. It hits the hardest of these spells, but we can see there's no fancy wording after it. It's just a nice big hit. Strength and intellect stat. Well, strength is 6, intellect is 5, so it's going to hit for 11 plus the 2. 11 and 2, we're going to be hitting for 13 damage. If we've gone down the decimation build, because even though we're in demon form, we don't have to use the demon form build. You can use demonic form spell anytime you like and transform into demon. We would, of course, have an extra 1 shadow damage there as well. But why this spell is so strong is because it's got 2 attack modifiers. If we're playing with a bard or a war drummer, and these guys, if the bard casts Shire, which is a cooldown 0 spell, she gives us +1 basically to all the base stats. If she keeps doing that every turn, we might have an extra 3 intellect and 3 strength, which is now an extra 6 damage, as opposed to if we only had a strength modifier, I'd only get an extra 3 damage. So spells with more modifiers are easier to manipulate, and of course spells with more elemental types are easier to manipulate through ourselves and through allies. Okay, that is the demonic form then, and then let's go out look at these 3 new demon spells that we unlocked. So starting from the top, we've got Demonic Curse. It's 3 damage and strength, which is nice because it's going to get a hit for 9. And we've got more status effects here. We've got, more detrimental ones. We've got Hex. Hex is horrible. Your opponents can't cast cooldown 4, 5, or 6 spells. No, it's not on there again. It's up here. We've got Hex. Here. Target can't cast spells with a cooldown 4 or above. So they can't cast cooldown 4, 5, or 6 spells, which just means half of your opponent's spells or their better spells they cannot use for 2 turns. Not only that, it's now going to confuse them for 2 turns, which means they can't cast support spells. So they can't cast any support spells, and now they can only cast attack spells that are cooldown 0, 1, or 2. Or 3. 0, 1, 2, and 3 attack spells, which is such a great play, especially if you can somehow time it with an opponent, because if you can paralyze your opponents, they can't attack. If you can confuse your opponents, they can't support. If they can't cast attack or support, then they don't do anything. They can't have a main phase action, they just go straight to the end phase. And unfortunately, you can't time these 2 together because... Or can we? Let's have a look. We do this, it goes to their turn, it goes down 1. We do this, it goes to their turn, it goes to 2. Yeah, because when it goes to their next turn, the first one you applied, either the confused or the paralyzed, would drop off that next turn, and then they'd only have the one. They'd only have the one condition. So if you can pair up the opposite one with another ally, that's a really strong little combo. We've got Demon Fire. This is a nice big hit. You can see that it's fire. So we've got the option. We don't have to... In scenario mode, it's fine because you'll hit level 12 max. Chances are you'll unlock a good chunk of these. In arena mode, though, where you only have 5 power cubes, we can mix and match our abilities. So we could take excessive fire here. We could take this here, and then we could go 2 down here. Then that way we've got the extra 1 on the fire damage. You know, it's an avenue if you want. You have to work out, is having that better than having this? Chances are probably not, because you only have, 1 fire spell, 2 fire spells, unless you went 3 down here to get Incinerate as well. 3 and 2 would work quite nice, because then you've got Demon Fire, Incinerate, and Shadow Frame. So this, over the course of the battle, is is gonna get more damage through. But anyway, looking at Demon Fire, it's 5 damage and intellect, and it's got this lovely effect here. There's 2 conditions in the game that don't have a token. One's Immobilize, and the second one is this. This is called Penetrate. What Penetrate does means your opponents can only use half of their defense stat. So I got a defense of 6. When you attack me, I can only use 3 of that. Okay. 5 plus intellect. Our intellect, when in demon form, is 5. So it's going to hit for 10 damage, and your opponents can only use half of their defense. It's a multiple target attack, so it hits them all. It's really nice. And then we've got Drain Life. Drain Life, 3 damage. Plus we gain 2 HP regen for 3 turns. Which is important, because remember, we're losing HP from our hero ability up here that's unpreventable and undefendable. Our opponents are losing 2 every turn, and we're losing 1. Okay? So that 2 HP over 3 turns is effectively 6 HP, which is quite important. So my recommendations are, once your HP starts depleting, you want to drain life quickly, because ideally you want to cast that twice in a match, minimum. One other thing I didn't touch on actually is how much HP this demon has. So let's look at it. If our opponents do not attack us, which is very silly of them, which is why we put the Warlock at 5 agility, because of the demon form. It gives faster opponents chance to attack us. If they don't attack us, okay, let's clean our board up. All these. We've got 45 HP. Turning into demon form gives us 50% more of your current HP, and down here we gain an extra 10. Okay? So I can't remember if we did a little calculation in here. We may have somewhere... or maybe not, we just gave an example. But 45, we're obviously going to gain another half of that. So what did I say earlier? Half of that is 22.5, rounds up to 23, which would put us up to 68. But we gain an additional 10 here, so that puts us up to 78 HP. Yes, we've got new stats. We've only got 3 defense, which is on par with the illusionist, which is very low. So we will die quickly, 3 defense, and we are killing ourselves slowly, 1 damage a turn. 78 HP. I mean, how cool is that? That's almost double your opponents. It's close to you 2 HP off 80, and the assassin only starts at 40, so you almost double the assassin. So yeah, they're gonna have to work overtime to kill you. So if the maximum HP you can go back up to is 78, then healing spells are great for you, because if you're with somebody like the Bard that can Song of Rest and give you 50% of your base HP, you can just net 40 HP from, close to about 39 from that heal. So that's the last thing to look out then with the demonic form. And then just a brief overview of some synergies. Decimation Path, I touched on it earlier, but going direct damage, we're probably going to want to have some protection. You've got a couple of options. there's a saying, we've probably all heard it before, that attack is the best form of defense. So if we went with a musketeer and we went direct damage, it would just be guns blazing, warlock, damage, musketeer, damage. And the idea is we kill our opponents so fast that what they do is over so quickly, it's not that detrimental to us. That's where the gaming term glass cannon sort of has come from, where you kill fast, but your character dies fast. Again, if you enjoy that play style, go for it. It's more like Berserker style. But of course, you do still have the added benefit of, you still have your hero ability, you can still gain a bit of HP, and you've got your death coil. Okay, so I'd recommend heroes in this path predominantly that can benefit from the fire damage or that can offer some support. So support heroes, we've got heroes like the Alchemist, got heroes like the Runesmith, but Runesmith is more so for strength attackers than intellect. So we might be looking at let's have a quick look at our roster over here. I mean, Blood Mage works well with every single path because Blood Mage can stack bleed on his passive ability. If you've not seen the Blood Mage Hero Deep Dive, have a look at that one. As I mentioned earlier, Alchemist is nice. The Warlock, Bard's fantastic for Warlock because when she plays the harp, she grants 2 intellect each turn. Oh, and she can also play, is it the lute? And you get 2 HP regen for 3 turns, which is nice. You've got Cleric, which is nice to work well in keeping your HP topped up whilst you'll go wild with the damage. Druid is nice again to work with. Paladin, works well with everybody. The Shaman is really nice. Shaman's great actually because she can increase your agility, and she's got a good bit of damage, and she can put protection on you and heal you. Illusionist doesn't really have much synergy. Musketeer works nice. Scholar, possibly, if you go down the Pyromancer path. So you've got a few options down here, but again, it all goes on. Do you go support? Do you go defense? Or do you go just guns blazing damage? Then you've got your demon form. Now, the demon form, the demon form holds itself, it looks after itself. From extensive playtesting, I don't think it matters too much who you play with demon form. You can just go with anybody. And as an ally, who doesn't love a demon next to them? The soul harvesting is more important, I think, out of the other two for who you're paired with, because this one, you double the fun. So each dot that you remove from each negative condition you remove from your opponents gives you an extra HP now. So you're going to gain 2 HP for each one. So the more negative conditions you can place on your opponents, the more HP you gain. So Blood Mage, Musketeer, these allies work really, really well with this path. And that's it. I think that'll wrap us up for the Warlock Deep Dive. This was a little bit longer than some of our others, thanks to a bit of community feedback. So we hope you thoroughly enjoyed it and you learned something about the Warlock. Please feel free to comment on these videos and let us know some of your. Is there some things that on this brief deep dive that I missed, that I forgot to mention, because these characters are so in depth, we can't touch on absolutely everything. I'd keep you guys here all day, and this is just our Warlock. So yeah, we'll leave you guys there. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a wonderful day. Take care for now. Bye bye.